Are the expectations you have for your relationship bringing you closer together, or are they driving a wedge between you? Unreal expectations in relationships, especially romantic relationships, are a silent assassin that will kill your relationship from the inside. Hi, I'm Jarrels. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I help couples find their happy. Today we're talking about unrealistic expectations, especially in romantic relationships. And in this short video, you're going to discover not only the origins, but what you can do to identify and even eliminate unrealistic expectations if you've got them. Also, be sure to stay tuned to the end because I've got a dirty little secret about soulmates. All right, let's get started. First, let's touch on the importance of understanding what unrealistic expectations are and what they look like. Unrealistic expectations, especially in your relationships, are those that you carry probably from things you picked up in movies, TV, and listening to stories from other people that say what your relationship should be like. So if you're ever saying to yourself, well, this should be like this, or this should be that way, then you're probably experiencing expectations that aren't really rooted in reality. The impact that unrealistic expectations can have on your relationship is huge because it sets the stage for what you think your relationship is supposed to be like. Now, that terrible word supposed to, and if you've listened to any of my videos before, you understand that I don't think anything's supposed to be like anything. So if you have an expectation about your relationship that it's supposed to look like, or feel like, or act like, or be something, then you're probably measuring your relationship to some idealized version of what you think it should be that you got from some movie or something else. Now, let's look at a couple of possible origins or places that you could be picking up unrealistic expectations of relationships. All right, there are three major places for our unrealistic expectations to originate from. So let's take a look at some of the possible origins. First and foremost is if you're comparing your relationship to friends and family's other relationships that you see in your circle of influence, then you're probably making the same mistake that many relationships make. And that's creating an idealized version of a relationship in your head based on all of the best qualities of all of the relationships that you find around you. We then impose that onto our relationship, thinking our relationship should have all of the best qualities that we've seen in everyone else's relationships. The second place that unrealistic expectations originate from is our own personal experiences. So let's say we have a relationship with somebody and things are going pretty well. We then use that to gauge every other relationship we have. Now, it's unfair because everyone's different and everyone's expectations, boundaries, and the things that they want or don't want in a relationship vary. So when we hold one relationship up to another that we've had, it's an unfair and unrealistic expectation to think that they are going to be the same as the relationship we had before. The third and probably most impactful origin of unrealistic expectations come from our viewing of media, social media, movies, all of that. So when we see relationships of other people portrayed in a specific manner or portrayed in a way that seems super great and oh my gosh, that's what I would love to have, that's what I want, that's my expectation for this person, and why is it that they can't live up to the expectation that I have? That's an unrealistic expectation. And we're carrying these expectations of what our relationships are supposed to look like, and our partner never really measures up. What impact does that have on our relationship or our ability to have a healthy relationship? If we're carrying these expectations, especially the unrealistic ones, and our partner can't seem to live up to them, what does that do to our relationship? It harms it, and it may not even be something that they should be held accountable for. So some of the effects of unrealistic expectations can be communication breakdowns and conflicts. Now what that means is if we're trying to carry on conversations and we expect them to respond in a specific manner and they're not doing it, that creates conflict very quickly because we think they're not doing what they should be doing, and that is an unrealistic expectation that we're placing on them, thinking they need to live up to my impression or my idea of what they should be doing. This is dangerous for relationships because you end up missing the actual person who's in front of you, and we end up trying to mask them with what we think they should be like. This can increase the stress and pressure in your relationship because it isn't matching up to what you think it should be. This isn't a great place to be in a relationship because instead of enjoying who we are and who we're with, we're placing this idealized version of what we think it should feel like, what we think it should be like, and then when it doesn't exactly match, we feel a sense of regret and even disappointment. And this can ultimately impact and harm our trust of the other person and even our intimacy. So what we're feeling towards them can start backing off, and we can start building up this wall because they're not doing their job, making us feel the way we believe they should be making us feel. So what can you do about it? The first thing we need to touch on is how to identify unrealistic expectations. Because let's be honest, we've got expectations for our relationship, and we should, because there are things that we definitely want. There's things that we expect, and those are great, unless they're unrealistic. Now, how do we tell the difference between a healthy expectation and an unrealistic one? I'm going to go over that right now. The first thing to do is self-awareness. Let's reflect on ourselves and look at what we actually want and why we want it. Okay, it's important to understand why we want something or why we expect something in a relationship, and then ask ourselves, does it make sense? And where are we getting that expectation from? So let's say, for instance, you have an expectation that your partner, your significant other is going to let you know where they are at all times. Like if they're going to work or they're not coming straight home from work, you want to know that, right? And if that's an expectation, is that an unrealistic one, or is that pretty realistic, pretty average? You have to ask yourself, why is it that you need to know where they are at all times? So if your expectation is that they have to tell you where they are because they're not trusting or they're not trustworthy, that can be an issue as well. So what we have to do is ask ourselves why we need to know that, and then is it or does it make sense? One of the things you can do to identify unrealistic expectations is to check in and figure out why you have the expectation that you have. Then you can ask yourself, is it even realistic to have that expectation? Let's go over a couple examples. Example 1, you expect your partner to let you know where they're going to be. Okay, so let's say they're coming home from work and they stop off somewhere. Expecting them to text you and say, hey, I'm stopping off at the store is a realistic expectation. But expecting them to be able to read your mind and know what you're feeling when you say, I'm fine, is an unrealistic expectation that places too much importance on their ability to read between the lines, and it isn't something they should be held accountable for. So ask yourself what the expectation is, and is it something that's even realistic? If it isn't, what do we do to eliminate it? The first thing to do is to challenge it. Challenge that expectation in yourself. You've already got the expectation. You say, I expect them to be able to read my mind. Challenge that and say, wait, why do I expect them to be able to read my mind? Well, we've known each other for years, so they should know me well enough to know. Is that true? Because ask yourself this, are you even the same person that you were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? No, we're constantly evolving and changing. So what we want, our likes, our dislikes, our passions, and all of that, change on a continuous basis. So realistically, you need to be checking in with your partner and using open and honest communication in order to share those things with one another and not simply expect them to understand them because your mind has changed for their mind to have read that. Now that we've learned to challenge expectations that we've got to find out if they're realistic or unrealistic, how do we emphasize healthy expectations in our relationship? The best way to do this is to talk to your partner. Okay, the reason I say that is because every single relationship is unique. Each individual within a relationship is unique. So by the time you put two unique individuals into a relationship, the relationship itself is unlike any other relationship that exists or will exist. So you have to figure out for yourselves what are the things that you want and what are the things that you don't want. The best way that I've found to help couples share with one another what their expectations and boundaries are is to use this diagram. And I understand it's kind of hard to tell here, but if you were to use your hands acting like each one of these is a sphere, let's kind of think Venn diagram, but if each of these circles is a sphere and inside this sphere is your expectations for your relationship and everything on the outside of that sphere is a boundary, when you share with your partner your desires, your expectations for what your relationship is, the amount of overlap in the expectations that you each have that overlap and share, the closer and easier it is to have a relationship with that person. So do it very often where you're expressing and exchanging ideas about what your expectations and boundaries for the relationship are, so that you can always have a clearer picture and be able to have realistic and healthy expectations for what you and what your partner are going to be doing and not doing in that relationship. Some of the other things we need to consider about expectations are some funky ones. So one of them is gender generalizations. Okay, we've got some expectations that we place on specific genders. Well, you're the woman, you're going to take care of the kids in our relationship. Okay, that doesn't necessarily need to hold true for every relationship because each one is unique and different. So let's stop using gender generalizations to create expectations that don't necessarily need a place in our relationship. The next one is keep your eye on social media, because what ends up happening is we see stuff in social media and those algorithms are really smart. And so they will put in front of you things that they know that you're going to bite onto. So if you're having a little bit of relationship trouble or something's going on in your relationship, maybe you're having a little bit of doubt or a little bit of trust issues, boom, the algorithm's going to see it and it's going to start plastering your social media with stuff it knows is going to grab your attention. So it's going to end up watering that little tiny weed that's growing in your mind and make it into a huge deal. So be very careful of what you do and what you click on when you're using social media, because it can jack with your expectations very, very quickly. The next thing you're going to want to consider is this: use flexibility in your expectations. I tell couples all the time, when you've got this thing here where you're overlapping and you guys got that area, that sweet spot in the center where you both are getting what you want in the relationship. And then of course there's those areas where one person expects, but the other person, it's in their boundary area. Be sure to be flexible. And the reason I say flexible and not compromising is because if you have an expectation that you'd like met, but it's outside of the expectation area and it's in the boundary area of your partner, it doesn't mean that it has to stay there. Now, it doesn't mean force them to do something they're uncomfortable with or that you have to give up that expectation, but instead look at why you want it. Go deep. Look at the meaning behind the desire of that thing that you're expecting, that thing that you're hoping for. And ask yourself, what is it that I really want? Now, you might say, yeah, I want you to call me and text me all the time, and you're not doing that. Okay, so that's an unrealistic expectation. But what is the actual need? Ask yourself, why do I want to be texted and talked to in constant communication? So that I can feel needed and loved, so I can feel wanted. Okay, so then ask yourself, what would it take for me to feel wanted without being texted constantly throughout the day? Well, if I were to get A, B, C, D, or this, or this, or this to happen, then I would feel that way. So then share that with your partner. I think flexibility and being able to figure out working down to the actual want, not just that this is the thing that I need. Okay, why do you need it? Go to the why. What would it take to get that why in another way? That's not a compromise. That's flexibility, and that's a win-win for both of you. So, thanks for watching so far. I've got another thing to tell you real quick before I share that dirty little secret about soulmates, and it's this. The difference between the expectations that we place for our relationship and the reality of what takes place, that measure, so if the expectation is this far above, we experience this much disappointment. If our expectation is closer to reality and even under, we experience this much happiness. So it's this much disappointment, this much happiness, or this much happiness. The difference between where our expectations and where reality falls is the measure of our disappointment or our happiness. Now, I'm not saying lower your expectations for your relationships, but instead of having vastly crazy, unrealistic ones that are way up here that make you experience so much disappointment, rather, if you've got really close expectations to reality because they're realistic expectations, then you're only going to experience a tiny little flux in your disappointment and or happiness, but your overall happiness balance is going to be much higher because you're not going to be experiencing these wild mood swings of disappointment because they're not living up to your unrealistic expectations. Thanks for sticking around, because I definitely want to tell you this dirty little secret about soulmates. Did you know that soulmates, the concept of soulmates, is a relatively new expression? It only gained popularity in the 20th century, so very recently, the idea, and it's been populated and propagated in media and movies to make us believe that soulmates are an actual thing that we need to be thinking about. However, historically, many cultures have seen relationships or put an emphasis on relationship that was much more on compatibility and partnership and working together, rather than the idea of a soulmate, like, oh, we were meant to be together. Now, what this does is this puts a lot of pressure on us to find the person that we are soulmates with. This creates crazy unrealistic expectations that we then push onto our partners because we believe if they were our soulmate, they would know what we were thinking. If they were our soulmate, they would be everything to us. They would fill every need that we have, and they would know them and recognize those needs before we even express them. This puts so much pressure on relationships that isn't supposed to be there, that it ends up destroying relationships by creating this false idea that soulmates, first of all, are even a thing, and second of all, that your partner should be yours. Well, that's about all I've got for this video. If you found it informational, please do give me a like and subscribe, and then do share any experiences or thoughts that you've had with relationship expectations, both realistic and unrealistic, in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.